Imagine being basically trapped on a floating steel fortress for like 265 days.
Right in the middle of an active conflict zone.
Exactly. While the waters all around you are just going completely dark with these multi-million-dollar ghost ships. And then, meanwhile back home, the government is handing out what are essentially digital letters of marque to tech billionaires.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Oh, for sure.
You know, you look at traditional geopolitics and you usually expect these clean lines. But the stack of sources we're looking at today, it proves that those lines are just dissolving in real time.
They really are. And to you, our listener, welcome to the deep dive. You have handed us a massive, complex, and frankly just wild stack of breaking news, intelligence reports, tracking data.
It's a lot to make sense of.
It is a lot. But our mission today is to connect the dots for you. We are going to draw the line between this extreme military strain in the Middle East, the shifting rules of global trade and cyber warfare, and some really staggering moves in the tech and energy sectors.
But before we jump into the deep end, we definitely need to establish a very clear baseline here.
Yes, a mandatory disclaimer. Because, you know, the sources you provided us, they contain some highly politically charged moves from both the Trump and Biden administration.
Right.
So as your guides on this deep dive, we are impartial observers. We aren't endorsing or condemning any political figures or policies mentioned in these sources. Our only job is to unpack the facts and ideas exactly as they are presented in your materials.
Precisely. I mean, we are here for the mechanics of what is happening, not the politics of it.
Right.
And just to give you a roadmap of where we're heading today, we're going to start with the human toll and the engineering realities of the U.S. Navy's current maneuvering.
Which is intense.
Very. And then from there, we'll zoom out to the chaotic economic choke points in the Middle East that are actually driving these deployments.
Yeah.
And finally, we'll land on sweeping changes happening in the private sector.
Like the cyber warfare and those structural tech shifts.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the physical reality out on the water, specifically the USS Abraham Lincoln.
Right, the aircraft carrier.
Yeah. According to your sources, this carrier is sitting in the Arabian Sea, and it has been deployed since November. We are talking over 260, maybe 265 days.
That's nearly 9 months out of port.
It's unbelievable.
And to put that into perspective, you have a crew of about 5,000 sailors living in a highly, highly pressurized environment.
Just packed in there.
Yeah, and you're operating at the highest levels of alert in an active conflict zone with essentially no physical escape. It's a floating city, sure, but it's a city under siege by its own operational tempo.
Wow.
And the reports highlight this severe mental health crisis emerging on board, culminating in a deeply tragic incident where a sailor actually jumped overboard.
I mean, that just vividly underscores the immense psychological pressure cookers that these ships have become. Now, acting U.S. Navy Secretary Hung Cao, he released a statement basically trying to cap this off. He said the mission is complete, the carrier is returning home as soon as planned, and a new U.S. aircraft carrier has been sent to relieve them.
Yeah.
And he also made a specific point to note that several mental health cases were treated on board with no fatalities.
Yeah, he's clearly trying to project institutional control there. But the tension here isn't just about the sheer length of the deployment. No, it's about the massive disconnect in the messaging surrounding it. Because the families of these service members are raising serious, completely understandable concerns about the worsening conditions. But President Trump has explicitly dismissed those concerns.
Right. Your sources quote him saying the deployment was, quote, not nearly long enough.
Yeah.
And then you have the Financial Times calling this entire furor an emblem of growing disquiet over the Iran war.
Yeah.
But what fascinates me is that layered on top of all this human element, there is this massive, unprecedented top-down engineering directive.
The catapults.
Yes. The president has ordered the Navy to revert aircraft carriers back to 1950s-style steam-powered catapults for launching jets.
Right. And the rationale provided in the sources is that he called the modern electromagnetic launch systems, quote, too complex.
Okay, wait, hold on.
And he's given the Pentagon exactly 60 days to develop a plan to switch back to steam. Furthermore, the Navy is now considering a major redesign of new warships, specifically to match his preferred aesthetic.
I'm struggling to wrap my head around the practicality of this. I mean, telling a modern aircraft carrier to ditch its electromagnetic system for steam power, that's like telling a modern airline to swap its jet engines for propellers just because the tech is too complicated to look at.
Yeah, it's a stark comparison.
Like, has aesthetics and nostalgia ever dictated modern naval engineering to this degree? How does that even work practically?
Well, historically, form fiercely follows function in the military. You want the system that launches planes the fastest with the least wear and tear on the multi-million-dollar airframes, right?
Right, obviously.
And that is exactly what electromagnetic systems, or EMALs, were designed to do. They use linear induction motors to provide a really smooth, calibrated acceleration.
As opposed to steam.
Exactly. Steam catapults are brutal. They require massive boilers, intricate piping systems, and they use huge amounts of the ship's fresh water just to generate explosive, uncalibrated force.
So it's not just like a quick swap of a part then. It changes the entire internal plumbing and power distribution of a nuclear carrier.
Completely. It alters the fundamental architecture of the ship. But this raises a much deeper question. What happens to a military branch when high-level political posturing actively overrides established engineering consensus?
You get systemic fatigue, the machinery breaks down, and the people operating it break down.
Exactly. And this isn't isolated to just the Navy, by the way. Your sources note a brief but incredibly significant parallel in the Army.
Oh, the Apaches.
Right. They had to temporarily ground all Apache helicopter flights following a fatal crash near Fort Hood, Texas. It really points to a broader structural strain across the board.
But it forces us to ask why this strain exists. Why are these deployments, like the Abraham Lincoln, being stretched to the breaking point in the first place?
And this is where we look at the underlying logic of the map. The USS Abraham Lincoln is stretched to its limit because the waters it patrols are fundamentally breaking down under the weight of an escalating shadow war.
Right.
The U.S. is trying to police choke points of global trade that are actively being contested.
And nothing illustrates that breakdown better than this map from CNN in your sources. It maps out how traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is physically adapting to the threat of war.
Which is wild to see visually.
It really is. And for context, the Strait of Hormuz is arguably the most critical oil transit choke point on the planet. Millions of barrels pass through it daily. But the map shows ships completely abandoning what they call the pre-war route.
The solid line is just gone.
Gone. Instead, the traffic is splintering. Some vessels are hugging the coast on an Omani route, some are taking an Iranian route, and then there is this deeply ominous path labeled the dark or unknown route.
Yeah, let's explain the mechanics of a dark route, because a massive oil tanker doesn't literally turn invisible.
I mean, that would be cool, but no.
Right. So every commercial vessel operates with an AI's transponder. It's essentially a ship's continuous digital heartbeat. It broadcasts its identity, cargo, speed, and heading to everyone around it.
So you don't crash into things.
Exactly, to prevent collisions and allow authorities to track trade. So going dark means deliberately turning that heartbeat off. They are erasing themselves from the digital radar of regulators to avoid danger zones or blockades.
So you had these like 300-meter-long behemoths loaded with explosive fuel, sailing effectively blindfolded through some of the most congested waters on Earth.
Yep.
And this is happening right as President Trump is threatening a total U.S. takeover of Hormuz, while Iran vows they will retain control.
Which hits the global wallet immediately. The tracking data in the sources shows crude oil climbing over $1 a barrel. Brent settling at $88.52, WTI at $82.40.
So the market is pricing all of this in.
Absolutely. They're pricing in the risk of these tanker attacks and the reality of a totally stalled U.S.-Iran peace deal.
But how effective is the U.S. posturing, really? Because the U.S. has a naval blockade on Iranian ports, right? But according to tanker trackers, an Iranian supertanker just loaded roughly 2 million barrels of crude at Karg Island.
Which is Iran's main oil hub.
Right. And they did this for the first time since late July. They literally just drove a supertanker right through the blockade.
It proves the blockade is highly porous. Traditional naval power is struggling to plug the holes of a shadow economy. And in response to that porosity, your sources indicate that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is preparing to announce an unprecedented economic isolation plan against Iran next week.
So if the military blockade isn't entirely sealing the leak, they're trying to tighten financial vice.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really fascinating, though. Because when you force massive ships to go dark to avoid military blockades and economic sanctions, you aren't just playing theoretical chess. You are inviting absolute physical disaster.
Yes.
And we see the climax of that dynamic perfectly with what's happening right now off the coast of Oman.
You're talking about the environmental cost of this shadow war.
Yes. A grounded tanker is currently leaking sanctioned Russian crude oil into a protected marine area off Oman. We are talking about a vessel carrying roughly 1 million barrels of oil.
That's a staggering amount.
And it has already created an oil slick estimated at 2,000 square kilometers.
Think about the mechanism of how that happens. When you push global energy transit into the shadows, you create a ghost fleet.
Right.
And these are often older, poorly maintained ships.
Yeah.
They operate outside of standard international regulations, they lack proper P&I insurance, and as we discussed, they turn off their safety transponders.
So nobody even knows they're there until it's too late.
Exactly. When you have unregulated ships sailing dark to avoid military interdiction, standard safety protocols completely evaporate.
It's just a tragic irony. Sanctions and blockades are meant to isolate adversaries and maintain order, but they are inadvertently creating this reckless fleet of unregulated tankers.
Unintended consequences.
Big time. And when they inevitably crash and leak, the environmental catastrophe doesn't respect international borders or political posturing. 2,000 square kilometers of toxic slick affects the entire region's ecosystem.
The overarching theme here is that traditional statecraft, blockades, sanctions, military patrols, it's struggling to contain the modern realities of global trade. The physical battlefield is slipping out of traditional government control.
Which connects perfectly to this deliberate surrender of control we're seeing from the government in the digital realm. Because the concept of warfare isn't just shifting on the oceans, it is radically shifting online and into the private sector.
This brings us to a memo recently signed by President Trump. According to your sources, he has authorized select private companies to carry out government-sponsored cyberattacks against foreign criminal hacking groups.
I literally had to read that source twice.
It's a huge deal.
Up until now, going on the offensive in cyberspace, actually executing an attack on foreign entities that has strictly been the domain of U.S. national security agencies. Cyber Command, the NSA, the CIA. You don't just let a tech startup launch a digital missile.
No, you don't. It is a fundamental shift in the rules of engagement. The government's monopoly on state-sponsored force is essentially being franchised out to corporations.
But wait, I have to push back here. It's like issuing digital letters of marque, like hiring cyber mercenaries.
That's a good way to look at it.
How do you authorize a private corporation to attack foreign entities without it being considered an act of war? Like, if a private tech company launches a cyber attack to take down a ransomware gang, but they make a coding error and accidentally brick a foreign hospital's power grid, who answers for that?
Right.
Does the CEO go to The Hague, or does the U.S. government take the blame?
That is the exact tension, and the legal framework for it is incredibly murky right now. But the underlying logic from the government's perspective is speed. Yeah. Governments are realizing they simply cannot match the agility, the talent pool, and the rapid innovation of the private sector in the digital realm. Bureaucracy just moves too slowly to fight code. So they are deputizing the private sector.
But while the federal government is basically handing over the keys to cyber warfare, we are seeing massive structural economic realities in the private sector that seem entirely disconnected from political directives.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about the sheer momentum of capital. For example, your sources note that $600 billion of President Biden's clean energy funding has managed to escape the incoming administration's cuts.
Which is a real testament to how entrenched economic infrastructure becomes once it starts moving.
It's like trying to stop a fully loaded freight train that has already left the station by unpaving the tracks behind it.
Exactly.
The capital isn't just sitting in some federal bank account. It's already locked into multi-year state-level contracts, factory constructions, corporate tax incentives. The political lever is completely disconnected from the financial machinery at this point.
And if we're talking about the sheer unstoppable scale of private sector power, you really have to look at the tech boom. You highlighted Anthropic in the sources.
Oh man, this number blew my mind. Anthropic, the AI company, is telling investors that their second quarter revenue surged over 14-fold year over year.
14-fold?
They're pulling in over $11.5 billion. It's hard to even conceptualize that kind of growth in a single quarter.
Well, to understand how a jump like that happens, you have to look beyond consumer products. An AI company doesn't hit $11.5 billion in a quarter just by selling $20 monthly chatbot subscriptions to individuals, you know?
Right, the math doesn't add up.
It doesn't. They are integrating their models directly into the back-end data pipelines of Fortune 500 companies. They are replacing massive enterprise functions, customer service arrays, coding departments, data analysis, logistics. They're becoming the underlying infrastructure of the corporate world.
Wow. And it isn't just high-end enterprise AI flexing its muscle. We're seeing grassroots digital community power formalizing at the highest institutional levels, too. Reddit is officially joining the S&P 500 next week.
That is a watershed moment for internet culture.
Absolutely. Explain the mechanism here, because joining the S&P 500 isn't just like a shiny badge of honor.
No, not at all. It unlocks a massive, automatic flood of institutional capital. Trillions of dollars globally are tied to passive index funds that simply track the S&P 500.
Okay.
So the minute Reddit is added to that index, every single retirement account, pension fund, and mutual fund that tracks the S&P is forced by algorithm to buy Reddit stock.
That's incredible.
An online forum born out of niche internet culture and meme stocks has successfully monetized its community to the point where it is now permanently embedded into the foundation of corporate America.
But before we assume the digital world is just going to consume physical reality unchecked, your sources provided this incredibly grounding reality check about automation.
Tesla.
The Las Vegas robotaxis. Yes. So Tesla went to local regulators in Las Vegas and sought a permit to operate 5,000 robotaxis on city streets. The regulators looked at the proposal, evaluated it, and approved, wait for it, 10. Just 10 cars.
Which provides an incredible aha moment when you look at the entire landscape we've discussed today.
Right.
The federal government is actively giving away its monopoly on warfare to tech companies because it can't keep up with the digital world. But simultaneously, local governments are fiercely reclaiming their monopoly on physical safety because they have to deal with the real-world consequences of that technology.
Because the digital world is limitless, sure, but physical reality still has traffic lights.
Exactly.
How does a fire truck interact with 5,000 driverless cars that don't know how to pull over properly in an emergency? Local government has to answer that question, so they hit the brakes. The battle line isn't just nation versus nation anymore. It's physical reality versus digital acceleration.
Precisely. And that brings us from these abstract billions in digital battlefields down to deeply symbolic physical actions happening around the world.
Because people are pushing back.
Yes, because when global systems are this strained and digital concepts become too unwieldy, people and nations start demanding physical, tangible control back.
Which brings us to Venezuela. According to the intelligence reports and the sources, post-Maduro Venezuela is now officially demanding its $4 billion in gold back from England.
Real gold.
Literally, physical bars of gold sitting in a subterranean vault at the Bank of England in London. They want it back on their soil.
And for years, the Bank of England refused to repatriate that gold. Their mechanism for denial was pretty simple. The UK government did not legally recognize Nicolas Maduro's government as the legitimate representative of the Venezuelan people, so they wouldn't release the sovereign wealth to him.
Right, makes sense legally.
But now that the regime has shifted, the new Venezuelan government is immediately challenging that old institutional hold. It is the ultimate move of sovereignty demanding physical possession of your nation's wealth.
And we see that same instinct to challenge old institutions on a micro level domestically, too. Your sources note that U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro just announced the arrest of a woman over the vandalism of the World War II memorial in Washington.
The red paint.
Yeah, she threw red paint all over the fountain.
So if we step back and look at the whole board here, when you place a nation demanding its physical gold back from a colonial-era banking institution next to a citizen defacing a historic institutional monument with red paint,
it feels like a shared global mood. A deep dissatisfaction with the way things are governed.
It is. Whether it's macro geopolitics, massive tech shifts, or individual protest, we are looking at a global environment where people and corporations are aggressively challenging the old guard. They are demanding restitution, they're questioning the fundamental rules of engagement, and they are no longer respecting the traditional boundaries that used to hold the system together.
It is a massive systemic unwinding. Let's try to pull all this together for you.
Okay.
We started this deep dive looking at exhausted sailors on an aircraft carrier. They're trapped in a high-pressure environment, being ordered by political directive to regress to steam-powered technology for aesthetic reasons, while they try to patrol waters that are actively being abandoned for digital dark routes.
Right, and we examined how those dark routes and economic sanctions are creating literal ghost fleets, which end up bleeding millions of barrels of sanctioned crude oil into protected oceans, creating environmental disasters because traditional statecraft is failing.
We saw the federal government deputize private companies to fight our cyber wars, effectively creating digital mercenaries. Meanwhile, AI companies are integrating into the corporate backbone to generate $11 billion in a single quarter. Cultural forums are being hardwired into our retirement accounts, and local governments are slamming the brakes on tech overreach to protect their physical streets.
It's all connected.
The rules of engagement militarily, economically, and digitally are being completely rewritten in real time.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over. If private companies are now explicitly authorized to fight our cyber wars, and ancient maritime choke points are going dark to avoid state-led blockades, we really have to ask ourselves, are we entering an era where governments simply no longer control the actual battlefields, whether those battlefields exist in the cloud or out on the ocean?
And suddenly, those clean lines on the map don't look so clean anymore. The underlying machinery is exposed, and we are sailing into very murky waters. To our listener, thank you. You handed us an incredibly sharp, diverse stack of sources for this deep dive today. It was a lot of ground to cover, but digging into the how and the why of these massive global shifts is the exact kind of complexity we love to unpack. Keep questioning the map and keep that curiosity sharp.